There's a small controversy at a somewhat obscure socialist magazine that is highly amusing and highly instructive about the failures of socialism itself. Now, the magazine in question is called Current Affairs, and my attention was drawn to this by a tweet which says, written by one of the socialist writers for Current Affairs, "I'm grieved to tell you that Nathan Robinson," this is the guy who is the Harvard grad and the editor of Current Affairs, "has effectively fired me and most of the Current Affairs staff because we were trying to organize into a workers' co-op." And then the writer goes, "I wish this was a joke, but it's not a joke." So evidently, you've got this guy who's a socialist, and he's being challenged by his staff that wants to create a union. Now, Nathan Robinson writes this really, I think, pathetic reply to all this, but it gives you a window into why socialism itself is idiotic. I just want to read and offer some commentary on Nathan Robinson's kind of almost sycophantic response, because he feels like his socialist credentials are being called into question. So he goes, "For years, I made the magazine basically alone in my living room, and I felt it's my baby and I know how to run it. It was hard to feel like I was slowly having my ability to run it my way taken away." So by the way, here's a completely legitimate sentiment. Nathan Robinson starts the magazine. He basically does all the work. He creates the structure, and now this workers' co-op wants to basically jointly govern the magazine. Now, Nathan Robinson says, "I think it's easy to talk about a belief in power sharing, but when it comes down to actually sharing power, it felt very difficult to do." So Robinson here feels like morally, ethically, he should share power. He never seems to ask himself the question, why? If it's his magazine, he got the idea for it, he started it, he did all the work, why would he create a kind of artificial equality between him and other people who obviously have contributed a lot less? The problem with Nathan Robinson is that he has already conceded the principle, and therefore he finds it hard to back away from it. Let me go on here. He goes, "This is not about money. I am not a capitalist. I do not expropriate surplus value." Now, this is idiocy on stilts. Why? Because first of all, what Nathan Robinson evidently does is he pays all staffers $45,000, including himself. So right away, he's conceding the principle that he is of no greater value to the magazine than anyone else. Well, if that's the case, why don't you make decisions by lottery? Why should you, Nathan, be in charge? So, and when he says, "I don't expropriate surplus value," he's buying into Marx's absurd idea that capitalists supply nothing other than capital. So all the idea for the magazine, wasn't that yours, Nathan? Number two, who organized the magazine in the first place? Who brought on board all these other guys? You did. Who's the one who's the face of the magazine? You are. Who markets the magazine? You do. So you're not expropriating surplus value. If you had any sense, you'd realize that you are contributing more value, at least to the degree that one can say that Marx's commentary provides value at all. But nevertheless, you're the guy doing it journalistically much more than the others. So he then goes on to say something like, that there was chaos that was coming into the magazine because nobody knew who was in charge. In fact, nobody really was in charge. Things didn't really get done. No one was accountable for them not being done. In other words, when you don't have organization, when you don't have responsibility, when to some degree you don't have hierarchy, things don't get done. And he goes, "All I wanted was the ability to remain the executive director of the organization, have the staff report to me to make sure stuff was getting done." Then he goes, "That may have been wrong, but that is how I felt." So he reduces it to feelings. It's not about feelings. He wants to get things done. Nothing does get done without organization, and yet he has to apologize for it and bring it down to, well, let me just say that this was kind of my sentiment about the matter. And finally, the groveling conclusion, "I will try my very best to make sure this is done, reorganization is done in accordance with sound leftist values." This was not that. So what you have here is the abasement, the intellectual depredation, the sheer embarrassment, the sheer stupidity, not just of one Nathan Robinson, but of socialism itself.